Right, this one's called the Black Velvet Band. And a neat little town they call Belfast. Oh, apprentice to trade I was bound.
You know, Portland is just kind of like architecturally and structurally set up to really serve nightlife. All of the bars are so close together and walkable, and then kind of like the old feel of the cobblestone really makes it a unique destination.
I was made to stray from the land, far away from me friends and relations, to follow.
I like the proximity to all the fun stuff, all the stuff I like to do. You know, sometimes I go, you know, I'm able to enjoy these bars and restaurants.
She was green on the land, she was with her hair hung over her shoulder.
I grew up in Portland, so I think one of the things that I really loved about Portland and being there was how diverse it is. There's so many different restaurants and so many different food options.
Now as I was walking down Broadway, and not intended.
It's a foodie city, right? And that really started with a couple of the greats in town, but it's always been a fun city. The Old Port has always had a wicked nightlife.
Now what she pulled from her pocket, she slipped it right into me.
Obviously, like proximity to nature, natural beauty, and there is a very like engaged, interested, food consuming public.
Oh, you think she was queen of the land? With her hair hung over her shoulder, tied up with a black.
We're right on the water. We have amazing food here. We have amazing, you know, an amazing level of community here. While I think that we do have significant issues, there is an element of Portland that I really love. You know, I think as Portland continues to get less and less affordable, we are seeing this talent leave because people can't live here. And, you know, while a lot of people probably think like, oh, these people are replaceable, that, like, again, that's the backbone of the city. These are people that are very, very good at what they do.
7 years transportation down to Van Diemen's Land, far away from me friends and relations, to follow the Black Velvet Band. On her eyes they shone like diamonds.
It was around 2016. I'd been working retail, specifically like retail pharmacy, and I don't know if you've ever done that before, but it's particularly soul-sucking. And at that point, the food industry was kind of starting to become a thing, or at least like more prominent on like a national or regional scale at that point. So my roommate Jeff, he had already had a job at Liquid Riot down on Commercial Street, and they were looking for support staff, and ended up just doing that to get my foot in the door, and then just kind of never stopped. Just kind of looked for more and more things to do there, and managed to kind of work my way up to it's like doing what I'm doing now, which is bartending predominantly.
I pulled so many all-nighters. I went to work after class sometimes, starting at like, was it like 4:30? Ugh, I hate thinking of that time in my head from like working for like the dinner rush or whatever. So I would get back at like 11 sometimes, and then stay up until like 9 a.m. to do homework and like get everything done to feel good about resting until I had to get to class.
I started bartending super young. I started when I was 16, and then I took on like bartending as kind of my full-time employment in 2017 in Old Orchard, and then in 2018 I came to Portland full-time.
I feel like I'm pretty authentic, luckily. Like, I do like talking to most people. Obviously, there are some jerks. Like, they're not being a jerk to me actively, but I know that they're just a person I wouldn't associate with in any other capacity other than me serving them food and drink. You know, I talk to people all day and all I want to do is come home and be quiet. You know, sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes I've got to do stuff and cope with that feeling a little bit. I have known friends who are working at like terrible places, and they come home and it's just like, can't really leave it at work sometimes. Like, sometimes it does come home with you.
The money is sometimes so good that you're like, whatever, it's fine. You're stuck in this like flow of making a good bit of money but feeling really shitty. And sometimes it's not a good bit of money, so you still feel really shitty. It feels like a spiral. I know that there's some people who are good at it, you know, and like can just like compartmentalize being a server, and that's like their job and like how they make money, versus like going home and like, you know, being home and it's whatever. But I could not. I was just always tired. I knew I had other things to do. I knew that I didn't want to be there. I knew I smelled like a French fry. Like, it never felt like rewarding.
You can tell when someone just comes out to have a bad time, or they're taking out their daily frustrations on you. And I think when I was younger, that's something I used to really take home with me. And I used to be really deeply bothered by it. And I'd wonder, you know, like, what did I do to make this person so angry at me? And eventually you learn that you can't please them all. People can be rude, and you're working in an environment where you're giving people alcohol. So if someone comes in rude and you add alcohol to that equation, it's not going to get better from there. And things can get nasty, occasionally violent, hopefully not, but it can happen.
I feel like it doesn't always happen to me. I feel like it definitely happens to women in the industry more, typically from men, sober or not, just who feel like they can, you know, they're in a position of power where they're the customer, so they can just abuse whoever they want. Happens to me less, because I feel like people don't feel like they can intimidate me, so they won't even try. But like, I've had plenty of women I've worked with like get yelled at and stuff. I feel like we need to protect the women in the industry. They get abused way more often than anybody else. It's really terrible.
The sexual harassment I've had is like, there's so much touching in serving. So much touching because you always have to tell people where you are, and I'm totally fine with that. But it's where people touch you, and I'm sure people have touched upon this before or have thought about this, but like, you can be like, hey, I'm over here, if you like touch you on the shoulder. But like, when you grab me by the waist, it's so unnecessary to tell me you're there.
It happened often, you know, men particularly making unwanted comments about my body, and occasionally like physically attempting to touch me. It has happened more than once. It will happen again. I don't like to say that it is an occupational hazard, because that shouldn't be an occupational hazard for anybody. But again, it is something that you develop your own ways of kind of handling in the moment and coping with personally. You really lean on your peers and your friends in the service industry for support, because they understand. But yeah, I mean, it happens.
I feel like it's incredibly difficult to find consistent housing, like more often than not, especially for us. And it's unfortunate, being the people who've made this city so cool and trendy for the people who have now moved here and displaced us. Not just like people moved here, but also, you know, the short-term rentals, you know, Airbnb, Vrbo, stuff like that. Like, it's really made it difficult to make, you know, keep this city as trendy and hip as it is.
It's impossible to afford housing in Portland on minimum wage, tipped or otherwise. When I moved to Portland about 10 years ago, I was splitting an apartment with two people, and my rent was around $300 a month. And where we stand now, for also a 2-bedroom, I pay about $17.50, which is a deal in Portland. So I think our housing market could definitely use a little bit of work.
I have always wanted to live here, but it is so expensive. I couldn't afford it. Working full-time or working 2 jobs, I wasn't able to on my own.
it's a facade in a way. You see how trendy and cute and hip Portland is. You feel like it's like a good, like, you know, people can afford to go out and eat sushi if there's so many sushi places. But like, no, a lot of people who like live at the Deering area go and park here, or like Uber here and do that and then leave. And then I have to walk home.
These people who are coming in, like, they get to disconnect from it after. Like, they come in, they enjoy themselves for a weekend, they spend a bunch of money. Then, you know, I just get to live it. So, like, I don't get to leave. I come in, I give these people what they're traveling here for, and I go home and then I do it again the next day. I think there are a lot of owners that kind of position themselves as empathetic, but in reality, like, probably aren't going to be there if you really, really need it.
It's very unfortunate. You see that in every city that has a food culture, is that the people working on it usually live on the outskirts and outside of town or in the low-income housing. Those are typically the people who are making this magic happen. It's certainly not right, or it's not great, it's not ideal, but that is not a uniquely Portland problem.
The people that work here should be able to afford to live here. It's nice to live where you work. You know, that is an integral part of community. Like, we can imagine so many realities and futures. We can create so much technology. Why can't we organize ourselves in a way where work and life are working together? You know, like, why do they always have to be in tension, right? I mean, it's because of capitalism, right? Are we not trying to make a better future for the people that come after us? You know, like, when are we going to try to do something different that is better for people?
What I love about the system we have today is that the staff and the business owner are tied together. When the restaurant is busy and more successful, the employee is getting a percentage of that, and we're successful together. I believe that the minimum wage is high enough.
I think that the minimum wage should be raised. Citizens didn't pass that referendum to increase it.
There were kind of two schools of thought with this ballot measure. There was a split between the service industry on whether or not to eliminate the tip credit.
But we're not the only employees in town. Like, even though we are a foodie city, like, there are still other people struggling with, like, receiving a fair hourly wage. I think a lot of people got lost in that. I think it was a little selfish because I think a lot of the focus was on the tip credit. You know, there are other people here, you know, and I think what lifts all workers is what should be most important.
I feel like the minimum wage should be $20, if not more, for everyone, plus tips. I think a lot of these arguments, again, come from people that have never worked in the restaurant industry or don't understand what it's like. I don't think people should have a say unless you've actively worked in that position or you currently do.
The disheartening thing is you see the loudest voices against it are businesses that probably have the money to pay their employees. And I generally think that more of the onus should be on the business owners to pay that wage. And tipping as a practice or a custom could migrate more to the exceptional service model. Amsterdam was one place like that where we got a few beers and I left like a $5 on the table, like, oh, you forgot this. I'm like, oh no, that's for you. I'm like, why? And you know what? If they ask why, it means they're probably getting paid fine. And like they didn't see that and go, oh yeah. Like if you saw somebody in Portland and a $5 was on a table and they didn't know why, they'd be like, all right, $5. That tells you something about the culture of your economy and how you treat your workers.
But question D was like the question heard, you know, around the country about raising the minimum wage. It would have gradually raised the minimum wage to $18 an hour by 2025. And I think like even that was people didn't understand that it was a gradual raise. I think people thought like November 3rd or whatever, the day after the election, if it passed, immediately raising the minimum wage. So like that conversation was a little bit lost for people, not realizing that like it was going to be a gradual increase.
If we look at question D, who was putting the most money into campaigning against it, right? Uber and DoorDash do not have the interests of your everyday worker in mind. To think that the everyday person's interests align with Uber and DoorDash is like hard for me to fathom.
From what I can remember, because the finances, of course, are always public, they received like $100,000 from like the national realtors, something national landlord nationals or something, and then they received $50,000 from Uber, Like the actual headquarters is based in California, $50,000 from DoorDash. So it's like $200,000 from these national organizations that like maybe have people that are part of their network that live in Portland, but are not based in Portland. So I'm not sure like how much came in over the last couple of days, but they essentially raised almost $1 million to crush the campaign of the working class. And citing it as like out-of-state activists are taking over Portland and taking over the city that you love. Like they worked very, very hard to push that narrative, and a lot of people who don't live in Portland donated.
Is something that is being brought from the outside, in my opinion. That's not coming from servers in Portland generally. It seems like an outside agenda to me, but there are a lot of cities in the world where everybody makes the same and lives in the city. Beijing, Moscow, generally communist nations operate that way. A commercial capital country like the US, when an area becomes affluent, people that are making less have to move to outer neighborhoods. And actually, then those neighborhoods that were bad neighborhoods become nicer because good, hard-working people are moving into them. So what was a ghetto on the outskirts 20 years ago, now we have good, hard-working people move in there. That pushes the ghetto out, improves the quality of the building, and it's a nice growth that way.
We are seeing Portland become very gentrified in the ways that places that are opening up within the city. We're seeing, very, very like wealthy owners being able to open up multiple restaurants in Portland in different areas of the city. We are seeing, of course, the housing crisis push out people of color, people who are low income, service industry workers who aren't able to live here anymore.
We've had like the same working conditions in this industry for such a long time and nothing has really changed. I kind of had to gauge how everybody at my shop felt for a little while, and I found that most of them were really fed up with a lot of the same things that I was. And I was like, hey, why don't we can do something about this. It doesn't have to be this way. And they were like, yeah. So I was like, let's form a union.
I think unions are very good candidate for meaningful change. Asking folks who are suffering under the system to be patient and wait for small changes is only going to work for so long. And we've been, how long have wages have not risen much, over the last, 20, 30 years? How much longer are we going to ask people to wait for?
I think people are getting a little bit more outspoken in the workplace. So I actually see that happening more often as Portland continues, rather than like a temporary thing. I think that that's one area where I would be surprised in the next couple of years if we don't see more and more unions start popping up.
I mean, I think it's definitely possible. I think every, kind of group of workers should have a union. At some point, the only people who are going to protect the workers are the workers.
Yeah, I'm bitter.